going to talk to you about poetic atheism from 3 different points of view, but the first one, and the one I'll talk most about, is really to point out why it is that I believe that poetry is the best description of the world, better than science, more realistic than science. The next one is to show you how many of the great poets, the top poets that you think of as the ones who are in the library on the top poet shelf, they're atheists, or they're profound doubters, and that's what their poetry is about. And so I'll walk you through that. That's the second thing. And the third thing is a little bit about how many of the great ideas in science that have come to be the things that we believe in science were poetic atheist ideas at first. That is, someone looked up and said, well, I don't believe in all that nonsense you just said about turtles all the way down, or hatching from an egg, or the virgin birth. I don't buy any of that. So then what? And that's how we first came up with the ideas that ended up being atoms, that ended up being the cosmology we believe in, what were the stars if they weren't gods, that ended up being the brain science that we believe in, and evolution. Long before anyone had a mechanism that could explain these things, people were saying, I have an idea about how it might work without someone making it all up. And they took their model from the natural world, the way they saw things happening in the natural world. So that's the third one. So the first one is about how I believe that poetry is the best representation of the world, more true than science. And I'm going to talk to you about that in terms of a bunch of paradoxes. I want to talk about the paradoxes of being human. I know that many of the ways that we live our lives are relatively rational. We make rational decisions, and we can count on 1 and 1 being 2 wherever we count it, at the grocery store or at home, where we live in a rational world. Indeed, I believe that religion has developed all along in order to help us notice, pay attention to, and deal with these paradoxes. And I believe religion was right in many ways. Religion is the history of the repository of human ideas about how to get in a certain mood. It's philosophy that you want into your body. You want to feel this way. So we need a little incense. We need a little showing up in certain ways, certain rituals. But what we're doing there is paying attention to paradoxes that are true and that science doesn't talk about. So the first of those paradoxes is consciousness itself. The meat thinks. The meat wrote Paradise Lost. The meat in your head is looking out of your eyes, and I'm looking out of my eyes, and we are communicating with each other, despite the fact that we are animated stuff. And that is weird. It doesn't feel right. Paradox is a conflict of opposing intuitions. The meat shouldn't be able to write Paradise Lost, but it does. It's weird. But given the fact that it is, we back solve and say, there it is, that's how it happened, right? So consciousness is the first of the great paradoxes. And it is better than any paradox you want to bring up from religion. I don't care what you got. You got flying, whatever, it doesn't matter. The meat thinks. Second, the second one I want to bring to your attention is really about reproduction. We fall in love with each other, these meat-thinking things. And when we fall in love with each other, we are drawn to each other's bodies, and out of that comes another human being. You think your brain is very clever. It got you into Harvard after all, or is in other ways impressing people you went to high school with. However, if I gave your brain all the money and all the tools on planet Earth, could you build a human eye? You and your brain. My body done it twice. My stupid brute body made eyes, made the speech region in a human mind. As human beings, we take part in things that we cannot fathom. It is a paradox. How could it be? It is very strange. And to add on in a whisper, that the fact that sex is also one of the ways that we brutalize each other, that we shut each other down, that we break each other, that is an extraordinary and strange thing that we have to add into that paradox. A strange aspect of being what it is that we are. All right, let's move on to number 3. Number 3. culture. Montaigne, the great Renaissance philosopher, was one of the great heroes of thinking about skepticism, about how can we know anything. You look with your senses, and a spoon in a glass of water looks broken, but you know it isn't. And he went through a lot of different ways that we might not be able to know the world. But one of the most amazing is culture. No matter where you're born, you take on the ways of eating, the ways of sleeping, the ways of marriage, the ways of sex, the ways of everything, schooling, how to dress, everything from that place, and you think of it as profoundly true, natural. Of course we eat 3 meals a day. Of course we go to sleep at this time. Of course we meet and marry in these ways. And we really think it's right. We also have a temporal prejudice that makes our time, oh, stovepipe hats, those people were crazy. Bustles? Nuts. Right? Meanwhile, we send ourselves to the gym to make sure that no whalebone on our bodies, but you want to see the bone itself. Right? We've got our own craziness, but every moment in history thinks that it's at the end of weirdness. The fact of culture, the fact that we believe culture, and of course the way we believe religion is one of the most profoundly strange ones, right? If you were born over the fence, you believe that it's Sabbath on Saturday. If you're born on this side of the fence, Sunday, and you're sure. The fact of culture and how that works on the human mind, and biology in that it just nudges us around. You look at the ants and you say, my God, why are they working like that? Why doesn't one just leave and go hang out, smoke a doob on the tree? I mean, why is it working like that? Then go to Harvard Yard or Times Square and you see human beings doing the same thing. They're at such an extraordinary pace of busyness. Through culture and biology, we are in a trance that sometimes is against our own wishes, but we cannot generally get out of it. And I'm not suggesting you should. I think we do our most beautiful work sometimes when we settle into what might be thought of as dull, that you're repeating what the world that you were brought into, but that's where you raise healthy children, that's where you develop the relationships that are real love, that's where you have enough peace to write great works. There's a lot to be said for that, but still it's good to notice it, that all these things we believe in are these weird cultural, just because you were born here. It's bizarre. Paradox number 3. Be a lawyer, make some money, or run around doing all these different things. Go to the gym, run on a machine that's named the actual thing, the actual metaphor for effort going nowhere, a treadmill. In a culture that's desperate for energy. But first, all you people go run on the treadmill. Next, space, the paradox of scale. Physical space scale. There are billions of stars in most galaxies. Some big galaxies have trillions. We're around an ordinary star in an ordinary arm of a spiral galaxy, a sort of large normal galaxy. There are billions of galaxies. Billions of galaxies. And billions of stars in a galaxy. And yet we feel so important. It feels so important that Trisha didn't like your casserole, that the baby is still coughing, that your mother doesn't have cancer. It seems so important. But we are so dwarfed by size that sometimes just thinking about the size can paradoxically make everything seem unimportant. The size is extraordinary. Just in our own solar system, 1,000 Earths fit in Jupiter. We can do the same thing with time. Human beings have been anatomically human for 200,000 years. The dinosaurs were dominant for 165 million years. They stopped being dominant around 60 million years ago. We've been human for 200,000. We've been writing coherent sentences for about 5,000 years. Literature, 5,000 years. It's a blink of an eye. You're worried about the fruit fly? Worry about yourself. It's a blink of an eye. Everything human is an incredibly short scale. You're in a bad meeting, my God, that goes on forever. But think about scale, and it can really put yourself into that mood of understanding the paradox of the situation of being human. It seems like the sheer quantity of people and of size should make things unimportant, but it doesn't work that way. We think there have been about 100 billion people alive ever. There are 7 billion alive now. Each one of them had hopes, dreams, disappointments, a sense of narrative of their life. It seems impossible that that could be the case, and yet it is. Again, this is real. We don't need crazy legends of religion. Most people have a lot of trouble reconciling the way life feels, which is important, and all of these facts. And we use religion to help us with this. And it is often, well, the next paradox is the simple fact of death. Death freaks us out. Mostly in the West, we have this sense of life having meaning in a certain way that makes it so that the reality of death just seems so shocking that we just try to block it out of our minds most of the time. And then when we're confronted with it, it really screws us up. In the East, for the most part, they thought that everybody was coming back, and guess what? They wanted out. Nirvana is about finally getting out, the bliss of finally getting out of this. Even in the Western literature, anybody who's granted eternal life regrets it immediately, right? They're all like, oh my, get me out of here. But we have this sense of please more, please more. Now part of that is because we're living in a post-religious world. That is, look, if you tell a kid Santa is coming, they get all excited, and if Santa doesn't show up, they're depressed. But if you didn't tell them that, they would not come up to you and say, I would like to sit on an old man's lap and tell him my wishes. It doesn't come up, right? And we were promised an afterlife, a very strange afterlife, one that most people throughout the history of time have not believed in. But our culture made up this afterlife, and we're living in a post-afterlife world. And so we sometimes wish there was this aftertime. But really, when you think about it, life is enough. It's a lot, and we barely use the one we have. We barely connect with it. We walk back and forth from the refrigerator to the computer, denying ourselves the chocolate cake, so that we'll live a little longer. It's a very strange thing. How many eons of walking back and forth from the computer? The point is that while you're here, and the more here you can be, the better. But more time at the end doesn't really mean much. This isn't a play. You're not going to miss the end. Getting into existence is a good thing. Living it well is a good thing. Focusing on the end is like being at a somewhat lousy carnival and looking at the exit the whole time and thinking, when are we going to be kicked out? You're walking around playing these silly games, and you win something, you got to crate it around for the rest of it. I mean, this is not a situation that makes sense to obsess about the end. And once you stop, you can start obsessing about whether you're really living the life you want to live. Noticing how short it is makes you get up and stop wasting it. It's not good to pretend it's not short. It's good to know it's short. It makes you live it. Okay. And as for the death of the ones we love, it's worthwhile remembering that it was good they got into existence, but now they're safe in the first reel. They were here. We have them. We have them in ourselves. They stay with us. It's sad in the same way that paradox of a lot of these things are sad, but it isn't really tragic. It's tragic to try to hold on to the things you're supposed to let go of.